Ugh, alrighty. Very bright morning this morning. This is typical of these autumn days. It sort of goes like spring during the day, but you have the cool nights and you've got this extreme blooming sunlight blasting in. And it's the same with spring. You know, with spring you sometimes get the, not just the cold night, but the cold day or the cold, morning. Sometimes it's all day. It won't go above 10 degrees Celsius, but it's, absolutely cloudless sky, full blast sun, brilliant time for, building up solar energy, which makes up for the odd overcast day that you get during the last days of winter and the early days of spring. Some of you may remember me talking about going to Colombia. At one point there, I had I've still got some member of the extended family that's Colombian, and at one point there I asked her if she knew any girls she could line me up with over there or stuff like that, and she sort of said, oh yeah, I might, but it was one of these things, are you going there? Are you going there? And I sort of wasn't going there straight away. And I said, well, no. And then it was sort of like, oh, well, Colombia's, very far away and it's a very different country. And sort of like, if you're not going to fly there, don't bother. Of course, I was going to fly there at some point. At that point, I didn't have a passport. Like a lot of things, you're not necessarily just going to fly there on a frickin' whim, especially if you have to deal with, certain things, if you're trying to work a job and keep your damn job, things like that, and in some countries, and I believe Colombia is not in this category, you need, malaria medication, which you've got to take 2 weeks before you even leave, and all this sort of stuff. And various people had their various opinions on that, including one person that said, why don't you go and get a Colombian girl here in America and take her to Australia? Oh, what? What for? She's already got to her glorious Western country, and I have been told that when some of them get to America or Canada, they start acting like the worst of the entitled white girls that were born and bred in these first world countries. I've heard that. I'm not saying it's necessarily the case, but I've been warned of that. Another interesting thing about Colombian girls is if you're a black guy, you've got no hope. They really hate you. They're racist towards black people, but, Brazil's just across the way, and that was the main area where the slaves were brought into in South America, and, they've generated their various stereotypes that leads to their feelings towards black people. So, yeah. Interesting to note, I saw a short documentary on favelas, and there's some in Brazil that are ran by criminal gangs, and they had so much cocaine you couldn't fucking believe it. They were sitting there with whole shopping bags full of cocaine, and the guy's sitting there cutting it, and they're all got balaclavas on. There's guys protecting him with M16s beside him, and something interesting I noticed? This gang that ran the favela, I don't think there was a single white person amongst them. Yeah, that could lead to them sort of stereotypes that they get. And, there's reading things and seeing things, and there's actually living in South America. And when you're in Colombia, you're living in South America. Anyways, there had been various other ideas that were floating around. And if you look at the distance and the cost to fly to Colombia and all this sort of stuff, and I worked with a Mexican guy back when this idea first came up, and he told me, "No, you're an idiot if you go to LA then to Colombia. What you actually do is you fly to frickin' Chile or somewhere down there, which is a very short trip, and then you fly north. And if you actually work it out, the miles are dramatically less, and you'll save yourself, $1,000 or $2,000. But this whole idea that I'm going to be just going over there, spending a bucket load, and in travel costs and all that stuff, and don't worry, I've picked up a bit of Spanish, but I've sort of let it go, and I haven't sort of learned as much as I should. This whole idea that you're just going to fly over there to meet a girl for a few weeks and then come back, no, fuck that. They've got good internet there. I'd rather be lined up with one, talk to them on Skype for a decent amount of time, and then if I think it's going to head somewhere, then spend the big dollars to go over and fly there. But this extended family member of mine didn't really see it that way. But anyway, there's been other ideas, and other countries. See, Colombia's become one of these ones where it's one of the top ones for mail order brides and stuff like that. And you go over there, and well, they reckon if you go over there and you see a really, really nice Colombian girl, and she starts talking to you, and they're not a 9 out of 10, they're 11 out of 10, some of these girls. You're actually talking to a prostitute looking to do some business a lot of times, but especially the ones that approach you. But I was hoping to avoid any pitfalls by, when there's people who live over there and all that, and you sort of got extended family members and whatnot, they know the duds from the real ones. They can pick it. They can speak the language. They live there all their life. They know from a mile off if you're dealing with a scammer versus a decent one. And that was one of the huge advantages with this. Having said that, it is a bloody long way. It is quite... Well, it's not that bad or a different language, unless you've got no damn language skills. But there's other options out there, and because it's become one of these real hot spots for mail order brides, if she hasn't got you, there's another 2 Americans lined up behind you. And you sometimes wonder if those other 2 Americans aren't lined up in front of you, and you're like the 4th or 5th wheel, so to speak, And that's another side of the coin. But, we're also surrounded by island nations that you can fly to within like an hour's time. And some of these are not second world, they're frickin' third world. And a lot of them are second world. A lot of them, they've got things, but by hell, their income is atrocious. Some of their incomes are less than what it is in China. And I can hop on a plane for a few $100 or $1,000 or whatever, I can fly to these joints. And the thought really occurred, maybe Tonga, maybe Samoa, maybe one of these joints. I had even considered New Guinea because, well, I've had relatives that have gone to New Guinea. My grandfather went there during the war. My mum and my aunt have gone there during the 1970s. I think it was shortly before independence. They went there, and they've talked to the people and all that business. And, they went right up into the flipping mountains in the highlands, as they call it, and the whole 9 yards. I've even seen photos of the beware of crocodile signs they have there, and it's a beautiful joint. Fantastic joint. In fact, my mum believes there's a pen pal she had over there, and she believes she's found the pen pal on some social media. Which would be interesting if it is really him, because he's actually a doctor, and in that country doctors are fairly rare, and some of the upper crust of the country, as a result. Just cooking some chicken wings here. Might need to add a bit of water in. Anyway, long and short of all this is that New Guinea, well, it sounds alright. Hang on, I've got to pause this for a second. While New Guinea sounds alright, it's actually a fairly dangerous country. And it's all right enough in the city, but they got a lot of what they call rascals, which are basically just common thieves and drug dealers and all that sort of shit. And well, I'm not saying it's as bad as Colombia was in the 80s. A lot of Colombia people don't realise is a lot safer than it used to be. And a lot of that shit's been wiped out. And FARC is basically in its last days and basically been shut down. And they were ones that caused a lot of shit amongst tourists. But New Guinea is sort of one of these joints that, they've become independent from us, and apparently they reckon in the halls of power of this country they only ever want to hear good stories, and there's a lot of bad stories, and they're all just ignored. And the corruption amongst cops has gone through the roof, and there's a lot of these idiots and stuff, and they're usually just individuals, not actual real full-blown gangs that cause a lot of bullshit, and it's not the safest place in the world. They have bride price, which for all intents and purposes, it's not technically dowry. Most Western people call it dowry. It's not technically. It's sort of slightly different. And they have this in Thailand, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands, and one other country, I think, which I forget. And it's not really a dowry. It's literally what it is. You are buying your bride. It's... You might say that sounds like slavery. Well, not really. It's one of these things where, technically you're supposed to own your wife like a piece of property, at least for, Solomon Islands. I know that's sort of what it is there, but yeah, it's... While I'm not going out and buying a bride from ISIS or anything like that, you wouldn't want to, because that'd frickin' blow me to bits before I even got there. But it's not sort of like they're selling off 14-year-old girls and that, but it's one of these things, when you come of age, they spent many years bringing this daughter up, and they sort of... the expected custom is that she's essentially sold off, and it's a little bit like a deal I made last night. I've ended up with a car that, not this one, whole other story I'll go into on another video, but that car I've got is just about buggered, and there's multiple problems coming up, and they keep coming up, and it's becoming a money pit. And I suggested that maybe, they said, oh, well, you can use it and this and that, but was it for real? Was it set in concrete? Well, to make it set in concrete, last night I paid $1,000 for that vehicle, and because I've actually paid for it now, it's set in concrete, and I think it's one of those things that, they're losing a daughter. They've spent a lot of effort bringing up their daughter. They've, and it's just one of these things. A lot of countries, even in Africa, they're handing over cows and stuff like that. And, a lot of these other places have a dowry. Now, bride price may be technically, culturally different, but it's much similar lines, even though it may technically be that you're buying her, versus giving a dowry for her, And I've seen people with Thai brides saying, well, how much dowry do your parents want? Well, actually, that's also bride price in Thailand. It's similar, but technically not the same. But there's areas in New Guinea where they got mines, and holy shit, they're giving each other new four-wheel drives as part of the bride price and stuff like that, you know. And it's funny, you see feminism here and they're all sucking over minor things, and, you know, I should get promoted purely because I'm a woman and all that. And you go over there, and feminism in New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, they have feminist marches about girls who were beaten to death by their husband. And, well, I actually saw a photo in one of these articles, and oh man, you don't really expect them to put these photos in articles, but I think that's the only way they can get things to change at times. Is they had a photo of the girl after she'd been wiped out by her husband on the floor in the house, dead, and you think, shit, I don't really expect to scroll down to that sort of stuff. But, you know, there's aspects there where, and this is New Guinea as well as the Solomon Islands, the women do a lot of the work and the men do fuck all, you know, because it's, the order of peck is really in the man's favour. And while I don't want a girl who's my little slave, I am fuck black and blue if I'm going to be the slave either. And I look at this country, and, you know, oh shit, you know, I've said it before and I'll say it again, and I've seen it a couple of nights ago. I had a slow internet connection. I went back on to one of these dating sites, and there's a way you can get through the back door without having a user name and a profile. And, you know, you can sort of just run a Google search on it and you'll get one that comes up, and then you can sort of click between all the different photos there. And, you know, I need a hottie with a body, blah, 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 and she got a young woman there who's as wide as the 4.5 ton forklift I was driving, you know, and there's sort of really a sense of, I want this and that, but I'm not willing to be the same. You know, there's a lot of a sense of hypocrisy. I've seen fat single mums of 2 kids saying, I need a tradie on $80,000 a year. You know, and that was, you could read between the lines, and that's really what it was. That, you know, and some of them put, must earn this amount. And you're sitting there going, you're a single mum of 2 kids. What? Who's supposed to be begging who here, you know? And it's like, oh, well, you know, you should take her on a face value. Well, I'm taking her on face value, all right. What's she got? Liability, 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 liability. Too many donuts, too many ice creams, and not willing to hold down a job. You know, and probably can't because she's got 2 kids to look after. Yeah, and this is the thing, you know. So much of this, you're coming in to not dealing on equal terms. And I'm not going to enter a marriage where I'm the one getting hounded that we need a new car, or I know I need a new house, and I'm getting to it, but I'm not going to go and borrow $250,000. And trust me, my brother-in-law's a building engineer, and I said, can you build a basic house for $100,000? He said, no way. You're not going to get anything for less than $200,000, most likely at least $250,000. Throw another $35,000 on top for a good solar system. You know, and this is the thing, I'm not drowning in that sort of debt. I'm not sort of living beyond my means, which is one of the biggest problems I find in these, you know, westernised countries. I'm not going down the path of constantly being handed, you got to do this, you got to do that, knew this, knew that, buy me this, buy me that, boom, boom, boom. And you wake up one day and, you know, you're trapped, and you feel trapped. And you just sort of, you're the one getting handed to do this and do that and do something else to please her. And you actually look at it and what are you going to get for it? Well, a woman who's already got kids to somebody else and, you know, isn't going to work, doesn't want to work, can't work because of the kids. And you start looking, what the hell is there for me in this? Sex? No, that's not even part of the fucking equation. That doesn't even come into calculations as far as I'm concerned. you know, and how much are you going to get with 2 kids, you know? Just ask a married person with 2 kids, 3 kids, how much not much happens. Especially when the little kids coming and sleeping in the bed during the thunderstorm, you know. And that shouldn't even factor in. But this is the thing, you know, I've just seen there's a real thing in this country where 80% of girls expect that they're going to have a guy who's within the top 20% of the populace, and I'm talking about looks, I'm talking about income, but the numbers just don't add up. You can't have 80% of girls marrying the upper 20% of men. It's just statistically impossible. But there's that expectation there, and if you're not there, they want you to work your guts out to be there. And really, with, you know, the addition of modern feminism and all that, there's no way in hell it's an equal partnership, and I'm fucked if I'm going in as some slave to run. Oh, but you want to provide for your family. Yeah, but I don't want to be a slave either. I'm not going into a master-slave situation here. Let's face it, you'd be fucking stupid if you did. Why? You know, oh, well, and I think, honestly, some of these guys who go through and I've come across them, I work with them, you know, they go through the mill once, they have 2 kids, so this bang, breaks off, they go through the mill a second time, you know, there's guys who will go through the middle a 3rd time. I had a guy I work with who'd been married and divorced 4 times. Now, how's this for a fucking story? He'd never been on welfare in his life. He almost had to go on it once, and he was nervous about going on it, but he'd worked all his life. He was 45, and I think since age 18, there'd only been 9 months in total where he hadn't worked. I'm not joking. He had gone into marriages to renovate their house, to spend $35,000 renovating their house, to be kicked out again. He'd gone through 4 divorces. The only thing he had to his name, I'm not joking, was a car that was like 15 years old. That was it. The furniture in his rented flat was his grandma's furniture, his grandma's TV, and here he was saying, oh, I'd get married a 5th time. I felt like saying, you don't need to get married a 5th time, you need fucking mental help, you know, on direction in life. Like, how the fuck can you work so hard all your life and then come out with, what, a car worth about $5,000? Oh, come on. Fucking hell. That's all he had to his name, full stop, you know? Then he might have had a couple of savings in the bank, but I think most of those have blown out the window with the last divorce, you know? If I was faced to go through that, I just wouldn't get married at all. Yeah, really speaking, you know. So, even though it's much on the other foot, I'd rather start with a girl who... I'm not saying I want a wife to be a little personal slave or servant, but if you get one in a country where that's the expected thing, where wives do most of the work, and they are, well, I mean, no, there's no question about it. In Papua New Guinea and the Solomons too, they're pretty much second-class citizens, especially in Papua New Guinea. And while I'm not asking for her to be a second-class citizen, if you get a girl from a country where women are on the backward foot, more or less second-class citizens, you know, you've got a girl who is quite willing to be on equal terms in a marriage with you. Is quite willing to, you know, work from home or do some minor thing to produce a bit of income from home, you know, even if there's a kid or 2 and she only gets a few hours a day worth of work in, she's quite willing to work from home as you go out to a job in the real world, you know, and, you know, do a couple of things around here and whatnot. And I know that when you've had a kid and all that, it's a bit of, you know, I've seen my sister go through all that, you know, the first couple of months there are just chaos and you can barely get out of the frickin' house or get anything done, you know, because you've been woken up bloody 3 times, 5 times a night with a new baby. But I'd rather have a girl that wants to work for us both to get ahead versus me to work and her to sit there enjoying all the luxuries while nagging me that I should have earned more and should have tried to get some overtime to pay for all the damn things she's bought that we honestly couldn't afford, you know. So, also when you go, I'm really thinking of going to the Solomon Islands. I almost did go this last Christmas. I almost flew out. If it hadn't have been for the damn malaria pills, I would have flown out. But the reality of the situation is that I'm seriously considering employing someone over there to go and, you know, see what they can rustle up, and I don't think it'll be too hard to find some reasonable candidates. Now, the internet is truly shit there, but they have a lot of GSM phones, which is, well, it's what I'm on now, first generation digital phones. A lot of them have that because they've got prepaid phones there, and even the teenage girls all have themselves a phone. So cell phones are very common there, and you know, that gives us a chance to talk in person for a fair bit before I go flying over there to, you know, meet them and see how we go from there. But that's the plan. You know, and as some of you guys know, I got nothing against blooming black girls, and I'd be quite happy to have a little black babies running around or whatever. It's no big deal to me. And of course, the amount of people going to the Solomon Islands to find a girl is close to zero. The amount of them want to come over here is fairly bloody high. Quite high. That's their dream, just like the, you know, you've seen it in America, all the ones that dream to get to America. Well, we've got the same thing here with all the island nations around Australia. You know, this one here, there's all the stacks of island nations. You know, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Kiribati, Vanuatu, Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, New Caledonia. They're actually not too bad off, and that's actually French territory. Wallis and Fortuna is a French territory as well. It's French speaking. Tokelau, a lot of those can get in to New Zealand through being one of these little dependent territories, as they call it, in New Zealand. Niue, there's a place called Niue. I know I work with a guy whose mum was born there, actually. That's also a dependent territory of New Zealand. These are tiny countries, technically, with only a few thousand in the country, and they really can't afford to even keep themselves going, so they sort of become essentially a colony of New Zealand, who pays for 80% of their needs to run the place. And you look at some island nations, the standard of living, and you go to this New Zealand dependent territory one, and it's like, whoa, they're a lot better off than the neighbours. And the neighbours are all trying to get to those to get to New Zealand to then ultimately use what they call the Trans-Tasman Agreement to get to Australia. And yeah, one of those sort of things that's, if you ever heard about New Zealand being the stepping stone to Australia, Trans-Tasman Agreement is what allows that to occur. It means that I can go indefinitely to New Zealand, but New Zealanders can often indefinitely go here as well. And there's no sort of time limit or real visa shenanigans to the same degree that you would otherwise expect between the two countries. Anyway, that's, you know, one of the things I'm really sort of sussing out and stuff like that, and probably going to have to go to an immigration lawyer and see what sort of process you'd have to go through, because each country it's sort of different. Yeah, it's, some of them do have the internet there, and they've got a free classified section that a lot of the country deals with. It's not exactly Craigslist, it's actually fairly small, but in that you can hire people over there to run around and do your bidding, and, you know, sort of pre-arrange stuff pre-arranged, you know, meeting girls and whatnot, and you know, if they've got the internet, I can at least take a photo with a phone and send me, you know, photos and whatnot, and see how we go from there. But that's really looking like a great option. And, you know, my mother said in New Guinea, the girls are fantastic. You know, they're beautiful people and very friendly people. And it's much the same in the Solomon Islands, except there's a lot less crime and stuff like that. And really speaking, when you get your wife there, the bride price, whatever you want to call it, is paid for in shell money. This is one of those countries where they still use shell money, and in fact it's sort of almost more trusted than actual cash, and, you know, it's considered the gold standard over there, more so than the local currency is. Now, it's about a ratio of 6 to 1, 6 of their dollars for one of ours. I think it's like $5.92 or something like, but it's about $6 to one of ours. You're talking about a place here, which, and I think it's about 8 or 9 of their dollars for every US dollar, something like that. And you're talking about a place here where, now you're going to friggin', the Solomon Islands is third world. New Guinea's second world, a lot of cars. Solomon Islands third world, it's more than 1,000 islands, so that's the real hitch, is just everything having to be transported so much, and there so few roads and people scattered so far over so many islands. It's really an economic holdback on the country, although they do have a lot of forestry there, and they do have a lot of tuna fishing as well, on a big scale. And long and short of it is, this is the yearly GDP over there per capita is $600 a year. Now, that's the product they produce, not what they earn. What they earn is bloody nothing. And a lot of them are unemployed because you just can't even get jobs there, and most of them live self-sufficiently. So, I mean, they are truly living self-sufficiently. Eat a hell of a lot of fish, and yams and stuff, but they truly are self-sufficient in these joints, and not mucking around, but have been for generations. Their concepts of land is much the same as the Aboriginals. You know, this is your land, your area, boom, boom, boom. Very hard to buy land, except in one area where they had a headhunting tribe that used to attack the surrounding tribes, and 5 or 6 tribes all got together and wiped out the whole lot of them in one hit. As a result, they don't belong to no one, so that's one part of the country where the government has actually subdivided, you know, bits of land, and you can go and buy freehold a house, and I've seen some of them, and they're pretty frickin' shabby. But yeah, it is what it is. You know, medical care there is atrocious. I think there's 33,000 people for every doctor or something, you know, and there's a lot of deaths from childbirth and shit like that. And, you know, they got a health clinic, some little tiny shack that looks like it's about to blow over. They have one male, not nurse, a nurse's assistant. And that's what they got. That's all. The only medical practitioner you got for the next umpteen islands is a nurse's assistant. It's freaking terrible. He's sitting in this little shack that's freaking hell. I mean, it's about the size of, it's not even half the size of my house. You know, and all you guys will know it's a fairly small little cottage I'm in here, but it is a poor as hell country. And the girls are, you know, for black girls, they're reasonably pretty. You get occasional ones where they sort of have that little bit of an Asian eye look sort of thing. But not all of them, just a few of them. And they have a blonde gene there that is, these are the black people who are blonde. It's one of these bizarre countries. Some people will argue it's actually sun bleaching, but they have found an actual gene that's specifically related to it, and it may be that how much you can take sun bleaching, but you'll notice it a lot in the little kids. 10% of them are blonde, and I mean like quite significantly blonde, and it's 48% of the population has a recessive gene, so they have the potential for their children to be blonde. Half of them. It's a fairly drenched through gene, but my mother reckons it's a bit like what she's seen in the Aboriginal kids up in the north of Australia. That a lot of them got sun-bleached hair as well, and I've seen photos of that on YouTube and stuff like that. You know, but